Have you ever found yourself completely exhausted from desperately negotiating your own basic worth, constantly lowering your personal standards, and frantically trying to convince highly toxic, deeply arrogant people to finally treat you with the basic respect you entirely deserve? We are falsely conditioned to believe that walking away is a massive sign of weak surrender, but the terrifying, dark psychological reality is that your absolute willingness to completely detach and leave the table is the single most intimidating, deeply explosive power move a human being can ever execute. Before we dive into today's life-changing lesson on the incredibly dangerous, highly magnetic psychology of walking away, please take a quick moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you these powerful stories. In the iron-rich capital of a brutally competitive ancient warlord's empire, there lived a legendary, highly disciplined master blacksmith named Valerius, who had spent 2 decades meticulously perfecting the dark, dangerous art of forging completely unbreakable, incredibly lethal steel. Valerius possessed a completely undeniable, once-in-a-generation genius, but he was entirely surrounded by highly corrupt, deeply arrogant military generals who aggressively thrived on deeply manipulating, heavily underpaying, and constantly disrespecting the desperate craftsmen of the lower city. When the supreme warlord of the empire aggressively summoned Valerius to the Grand Palace to secure the massive, highly coveted contract for arming his elite royal guard, the arrogant ruler entirely expected the young blacksmith to drop to his knees and desperately beg for the incredible honor. Valerius calmly approached the heavy stone throne, confidently presenting a single, flawlessly balanced, perfectly forged black steel blade that was completely sharp enough to effortlessly cut through the thickest, most expensive royal armor in the entire kingdom. The arrogant warlord greedily examined the breathtaking, incredibly lethal weapon, his eyes heavily widening with deep, secret admiration, but his massive, fragile ego absolutely refused to publicly validate a man he viewed as a dirty, entirely replaceable commoner. In a highly calculated, deeply manipulative attempt to completely shatter Valerius's confidence and heavily drive down the price, the warlord threw the flawless blade onto the stone floor, loudly mocking the craftsmanship and aggressively offering a pathetic, completely insulting fraction of its true, undeniable worth. The warlord leaned back in his massive golden throne, fully expecting Valerius to instantly panic, frantically argue about his long hours of intense labor, and desperately negotiate a weak, highly submissive compromise just like every single other pathetic craftsman had done before him. But Valerius did not wildly flinch. He did not turn red with explosive anger, and he absolutely did not open his mouth to desperately explain his massive, deeply unappreciated value to a highly arrogant man who was actively committed to violently disrespecting him. Instead, Valerius simply stared directly into the warlord's deeply insecure eyes with a cold, terrifyingly blank, completely unbothered expression, slowly knelt down and peacefully picked up his priceless, flawless black steel blade from the dirty stone floor. Without saying a single desperate word, without bowing to the massive throne, and without showing even a tiny fraction of pathetic hesitation, Valerius calmly turned his back on the most dangerous, powerful man in the entire empire and began silently walking directly out of the Grand Palace doors. A completely suffocating, terrifyingly heavy silence immediately fell over the massive throne room as the arrogant generals watched in absolute, stunned horror, deeply paralyzed by the breathtaking, incredibly intimidating audacity of a man who was entirely willing to just walk completely away. The warlord suddenly felt a massive, deeply violent surge of psychological panic completely crush his chest, entirely realizing that his cheap, pathetic manipulation tactic had completely failed, and he had just actively lost the greatest, most lethal military asset his kingdom would ever see. He desperately ordered his elite guards to aggressively stop the young blacksmith, frantically shouting out massive, increasingly desperate offers of heavy gold, vast lands, and high royal titles, violently begging Valerius to reconsider his completely silent, absolutely terrifying departure. But Valerius completely ignored the desperate, highly pathetic screams of the incredibly powerful warlord, continuously walking away into the misty, dark forest with the absolute, untouchable peace of a man who deeply knew that his massive, undeniable value was not up for a cheap, toxic debate. Because Valerius fiercely protected his premium energy and entirely refused to supply the corrupt empire, the arrogant warlord was violently forced to arm his elite guards with cheap, highly brittle, incredibly inferior weapons forged by desperate, weak men who had eagerly accepted his toxic disrespect. Just a few short months later, a massive, highly aggressive barbarian army violently attacked the supposedly impenetrable capital city, aggressively exploiting the severe weakness of the warlord's pathetic, poorly armed royal guard. The incredibly cheap, heavily compromised swords of the empire completely shattered into thousands of useless pieces during the very first brutal clash, leaving the highly arrogant, completely defenseless generals to be violently slaughtered in the dark, muddy streets of their own burning city. Meanwhile, miles away in a peaceful, incredibly wealthy neighboring kingdom, Valerius was heavily protected, deeply respected, and massively compensated by a highly intelligent king who immediately recognized his brilliant, undeniable worth without ever needing to be aggressively convinced. This dark, incredibly aggressive psychological story holds an absolutely urgent, deeply life-altering truth for anyone who is currently trapped in the highly toxic, completely exhausting cycle of deeply compromising their own massive worth just to keep a deeply manipulative person in their life. You must fundamentally understand that the dark psychology of human negotiation is entirely built on the terrifying, absolute concept of leverage, and the person who desperately needs the deal to happen is always the one who holds absolutely zero power. When you constantly stay in highly toxic relationships, severely underpaid jobs, or deeply disrespectful friendships, aggressively hoping they will eventually suddenly realize your massive value, you are actively teaching them that your heavy presence is incredibly cheap and completely guaranteed. Manipulators and deep narcissists absolutely thrive on your pathetic, desperate fear of abandonment, heavily relying on the toxic assumption that no matter how brutally they disrespect you, you will absolutely never possess the cold, terrifying courage to actually leave them. The absolute highest form of psychological dominance you can ever actively deploy against a deeply toxic person is the cold, terrifyingly powerful, highly explosive ability to completely remove your incredibly premium, heavily unappreciated presence from their pathetic life. Walking away is not a dramatic, highly emotional reaction born from deep weakness. It is a highly calculated, heavily stoic, completely brutal declaration of ultimate self-respect that violently shatters the massive unearned ego of the person trying to completely control you. When you calmly pack your bags and entirely remove yourself from a highly disrespectful table without screaming, without aggressively explaining, and without desperately demanding a pathetic closure, you completely short-circuit the manipulator's toxic brain. They are entirely programmed to aggressively fight your loud complaints, but they are completely, absolutely defenseless against your sudden, terrifyingly silent absence, plunging them into a massive, highly suffocating spiral of deep panic and extreme, desperate regret. Stop fiercely negotiating your deeply valid boundaries with people who are entirely committed to heavily misunderstanding you and absolutely refuse to offer premium, highly expensive loyalty to incredibly cheap, deeply ungrateful people. If someone actively shows you that they do not deeply value your brilliant, beautiful existence, you must completely believe their disrespectful actions the very first time, totally withdraw your massive energy, and confidently walk away without a single pathetic look backwards. True, undeniable power is completely recognizing that the vast, incredible universe is absolutely overflowing with massive, beautiful opportunities, and you do not ever need to desperately cling to a toxic, highly poisonous drop of water when you completely own the entire ocean. The exact moment you boldly decide to completely stop accepting the pathetic, heavily disrespectful crumbs that highly arrogant people aggressively throw at you is the exact moment you instantly reclaim the massive, undeniable steering wheel of your own incredible life. You must learn to completely fall in love with the highly intimidating, absolutely liberating power of the word no, completely weaponizing your own absence to violently filter out absolutely anyone who refuses to pay the incredibly high, premium price of your valuable time. Let them violently whisper behind your massive back. Let them falsely play the highly innocent victim, and let them desperately create entirely fake narratives about your cold departure, to desperately soothe their own massive, unhealed, deep internal trauma, while they are entirely obsessed with angrily talking about your sudden disappearance. You will be deeply focused on aggressively building a massive, undeniably brilliant, highly untouchable future in a completely new environment that actively celebrates your undeniable greatness. Take a massive, incredibly deep breath today. Forcefully close your beautiful heart to their deep manipulation. Completely drop the heavy, exhausting burden of constantly trove your massive worth, and allow your complete absence to violently teach them the lesson they entirely refused to learn from your presence. Master the terrifying, completely invincible art of total emotional detachment. Strictly refuse to negotiate your immense worth with deeply blind people, and aggressively step into the glorious, profoundly silent power of actively walking away. Do not ever desperately beg for a seat at their highly toxic, entirely broken table when you hold the massive, undeniable power to confidently walk into the forest and completely build your own incredibly beautiful, highly untouchable castle. Your ability to completely walk away is your absolute greatest, most heavily guarded psychological weapon. Aggressively keep it sharp, violently keep it completely ready, and absolutely never be afraid to fiercely use it to protect your own massive peace. When you finally leave behind the people who entirely failed to see your brilliant, glowing light, you violently open the heavy doors to a massive, beautifully bright future filled with the absolute, highly elevated respect you have always truly deserved. Reclaim your absolute power today. Completely ignore their desperate, pathetic screams for you to return, and confidently walk directly into the massively successful, deeply peaceful reality that is actively waiting for your beautiful arrival. Stay cold to the manipulation, stay incredibly focused on your own massive growth, and let your absolute, terrifying absence be the loudest, most devastating statement you ever actually make. If you found true value in this dark, psychological lesson and learned something incredibly important about the undeniable power of walking away today, please hit that like button, leave a comment below about your own journey, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful life lessons.